Welcome. Thank you for joining this first conversation with some of the artists working in Circuits of Correspondence, a mail art project bringing together a network of international artists and cultural producers to reflect on solidarity and connection as acts of resistance. As part of the project, the artists are exchanging correspondence in two simultaneous ways, via snail mail and email, with prompts addressing topics such as radical kinship, acts of kindness, and what it means to be a cultural producer today. My name is Elena Preciado, and I'm the curator and director of programs at LACE. I'd like to give a huge thanks to the LACE team, Sarah Russen, Fiona Crary, and Juan Silverio, who is the host this morning, and our former colleagues Camille Wong and Jonah Chen, who also helped develop this project. The participating artists and Circuits of Correspondence are Mitsuko Brooks, Abril Castro, Regina José Galindo, Raquel Gutiérrez, Laila Hida, Laura Dudu, and Huiyin Zhou, and Geraldine Lanteri. We're joined today by Mitsuko Brooks, Raquel Gutiérrez, Laila Hida, and Hutu, who are Laura and Huiyin, and they are the facilitators for the conversation today. We also have simultaneous interpretation in English and Spanish by Alexia Beitia Rubio. Mitsuko Brooks is a male artist and archivist of mixed and settler Japanese and European descent, currently living and working in Lapehoking, which is Brooklyn, New York. Raquel Gutierrez is a writer, performer, and the author of Brown Neon. She is the recipient of the Publishing Triangle Judy Grain Award for Lesbian Nonfiction. Gutierrez lives on unceded lands of the Tohono, O'odham, and Pasco Yaqui people in South Central Arizona. Laura Hida is a Franco-Moroccan artist and cultural worker based in Marrakesh, where she founded Le 18 Marrakesh, a multidisciplinary cultural space and artist residency. Photography has been her medium of choice as both a historical record and a trigger for fiction. Laura, Dudu, and Huiyin Zhao is an artist duo with backgrounds in social practice and anthropology, working across moving image, photography, performance, and collaborative writing. Laura and Huiyin co-direct the Chinese artists and organizers Scale Collective and the Survivors Anchoring Art Narrative Garden SANG project, a co-creative imaginative land for sexual and racial abuse survivors, who too create spaces of co-living and collective rest to reimagine and relearn intimacy and collective survival. The project also includes Abril Castro, Regina Galindo, and Geraldine Lanteri. They will join us on our next virtual conversation on April 19th, so please mark your calendars. Abril Castro Prieto is a poet, arts administrator, and curator interested in our community impact, periphery and dissent, rupture, and diversion. She currently works as coordinator of the Visual Arts Department at Museo Universitario del Chopo, UNAM. She's a collector and anonymous sender of antique postcards. Regina José Galindo is a visual artist and poet whose primary medium is performance. Galindo lives and works in Guatemala, using the country's own context as starting point to explore and accuse the ethical implications of social violence and injustices related to gender and racial discrimination. Geraldine Lanteri is an artist and educator based in Buenos Aires, Argentina, working primarily in documentary photography, writing, and music. She's the director of Escuela Sentimental School, a virtual school of photography that offers online theoretical and practical workshops since 2023. She's a member with Aldo Benitez of Misterio Tarot, a duo of DJs and tarot enthusiasts. From their brief bios, you can find the connections and affinities that were the starting point of this invitation, I hope, as their life and work has collective intersections with male art, photography, poetry or writing, performance art, and cultural activism. So thanks to Laura and Huiyin again for facilitating the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're literally thinking about currently Queen and I are in the same physical space and we're like next to each other. And so there might be some sound issues here and there, but we will try our best to speak to the mic. And so to begin with, thank you so much and welcome. Hui and I are very glad to have you all here with us, and we're very grateful to be the facilitator or be the facilitator for this conversation and also thinking this as a vessel, a container, and we're all weavers for this fluid space together. And feel free during the session if you wanted to. We will have prompt questions for all invited artists to join, but feel free if you wanted to take a break or to grab water. And we want to prioritize our mental health being and also physical health. And so we will open this conversation through three sets of questions, and on the conversation in the intersection of writing, mail art, and activism, and multimedia art. And to start with, and we also wanted to share this moment by reflecting something very much deeply personal. And I will see if we could share a screen for our first set of questions.
Could you allow screen share access for Laura?
Thank you. What was your first memory of writing or receiving a letter or mail, and how was your feeling?
Are these questions to write or to answer on the spot?
I think these questions we can take like a minute or two to just like self-journaling or to reflect. While we people doing that, we will play some music, and after 2 minutes, and we can like open up as a conversation to start sharing. So the first question will be just basically wanting us to, so it's also the first time for many of the artists to meet for the very first time. So I just kind of want to take a pause and to kind of reflect about when was our first encounter with, or our memory, I guess, because they are definitely, I want to recognize they are also ancestral memories and live in our body that maybe we don't realize, but it's in us, but maybe some memory that we could all recall that our first memory was writing or receiving a letter or mail. And how was that? How was your feeling?
And it could also include it could be a feeling, a place, a sense of touch, or a sound that you remember. It could be very fluid in that sense.
What? Do you want to put whatever the directions on?
I can put it on there. On here. Yeah. Do you mind starting it up though? Because I don't. There we go. Idea what's going on. Of course. Okay, let's see. It is called the
Let me go to
Be free, so free, like a feather blown through the breeze, like a bird in a tree, like a dolphin in the sea. I wanna fly high, so high, like an eagle in the sky. And when my time has come,
那我就不用你的声音上了，用我
let it
的。
all go with a sigh. Pachamama, coming home to the place Pachamama, coming home to the place where I belong. Pachamama, coming home to the place where I belong.
I'd love to open up the floor and see how people wanting to respond to the question. You can also start first.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to get us started here with the response, just because it's such a powerful memory. I was in second grade, and in our living room, my dad had his old Royal typewriter, and I was fascinated by that machine, and I saw the opportunity to use it to write letters to my brother. So when I was 7, my brother, who's 14 years older than me, I guess he was about 20, and he was already a year in the Marines, the U.S. Marine Corps, and so he was stationed in Okinawa, and I would write to him and just wait for his letters, and his letters were were sweet, and maybe one of the few ways I would actually extract like attention and sweetness from him. And I remember he would um, write English phrases and their Japanese equivalent for me to learn. But it's really interesting just to sort of, in hindsight, now I'm in, almost 50, and just the way that my sort of political consciousness emerges between 7 and 48, and sort of the complexity of that engagement with my brother. But yeah, so I feel it's a poignant memory, and it's also a sad memory, in just hindsight of feeling like, my brother was an operative of the state, and being trained in a really complicated, not too complicated. I think it's very cut and dry, but just that he was in a military training, and that an instance of his young adulthood sort of stripping away his like sense of his own autonomy. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Does anyone else want to go next?
I can go. I have a memory of the first letter that I received. It's probably not the first one that I would receive, but this is what I remember because it's the memory of a correspondence with a friend of mine. We were in school together. I think we were in, I don't know how we call it, but junior high school. Was around 13 years old, 14 years old. And suddenly, during the course of the year, with his family, they immigrated. We were living in Casablanca, and they immigrated to the US. They went to live in New York. And it happened from one day to the other. So he just came to say goodbye. We're very close. And he explains that he's going to New York. And for me, at that time, in Casablanca, we're young. I've never been to the US. I only know the US and New York from television and cinema, etc. So it's quite a big thing for us that he's going there. And then after a few months, I received the first letter. So he explained to me everything that have happened during the course of this time. They're moving to New York, what they're doing. And it's a letter where he's very detailed about what they're doing every day and what's his life like. But they just arrived, so he's discovering kind of everything. So it was very important for me because that was the beginning of my first real correspondence with someone.
Mm.
And so we kept this correspondence for quite a long time, many years, until internet. So that started, I think, in the 19s, and then there's internet, and we moved to the emails, and it's different. And it's funny because we never met again until recently, so maybe more than 20 years after. And we met for a very brief time. He came to Marrakesh, and he came to meet me at my office where I work, and we spent a very short time because it was during an event and we couldn't really stay long and discuss. So we have a brief conversation, and yeah, I think we really sort of have a relation through mail, and we have developed this relation through mail and through a memory that we had from each other from our childhood. And when we met again, it was really funny because it was as if we never separate, but at the same time, we have never seen each other after that. So yeah, it's that was my memory.
That's amazing that you all got to meet in person. And I feel like there's so much about kind of time that is experienced very differently through mail, and like geography and place, and how I think it's really fascinating how like even like these very personal connections that we're practicing, like kind of like as an everyday practice, like it's very much laden in this personal history of like immigration, like how nation states function, and like and yeah, and it's all very interconnected through this very like seemingly small physical object. And then it's also interesting to think about like in this digital time, like how we are preserving like the correspondences that we have with each other that are like existing through like emails or like social media, and how a lot of that kind of have like a timeless, like a seemingly like a timelessness to it, but it's also it's actually very fragile. And like, so how do we archive and like, you know, think about the relationship between like the analog and like and the digital, and I think that is something really fascinating for me. I have a memory of a letter that I don't know if it was actually sent, but I do remember writing it. And it was when I was in kindergarten, I think, or like maybe first grade. I was actually writing a letter to the then chairman of China. And because I was seeing a lot of, because I grew up in Guangdong, in Dongguan, and and it's like, for context, it's an industrial city with a lot of migrant workers, and that's kind of how my family ended up migrating from other provinces, from Hunan, from Jiangsu to Dongguan, because there's like more opportunities, like with the reform opening up a lot of factories, mushrooming like in the area. And so that's how a lot of my relatives ended up in that area. That's why I was born and raised there. So so there's a lot of like influx of like migration, a lot of, but the infrastructure is not, it's not good enough to support a lot of migrant workers, and like all of these changes that are happening in the city. There was a lot of just like, like not enough infrastructure to support everyone. So I was this kid like wandering in the city, and I see so many people with no housing, like a lot of people who are forced into homelessness, and so I was like very confused about what was happening, and I wanted to like, I don't know, just say something and be like, can you please do something to like make sure that people have a place to live and like have things to eat. And that was something that like sometimes I look back at that letter, like I think I might still have it somewhere like in this box in my home, like in China. Because I think my parents preserved it. I don't know what exactly was the reason that like we like never sent it, probably because we thought even if we sent it, it wouldn't do anything. But I remember writing it and thinking about like how my politics like how a lot of like political consciousness, sometimes like I'm thinking about my political journey maybe like more like from my teenage years, like tracing that lineage, tracing my history like through that time, like in terms of when I get more explicitly like or intentional about like coming into political awareness. But then there are all of these like bits and pieces of memories that sometimes come up like that are actually very much just like ingrained in like my upbringing and like the context in which like I was raised and like the kind of daily observations that I had like as just like a person like living relationally with other people in a city that has so much loaded history with like industrialization, with like all of this also very like racialized and like ethnicized like labor practices and environmental, you know, hazards and all of that, like how a lot of that actually is very much like part of my first memories and actually like very foundational to like the kind of politics that I have right now, like as a transnational like queer feminist organizer, like thinking along those lines of cultural organizing and what it means for us to build towards a world where people can live like with at least like our basic needs like met. But that's something that I don't know, just randomly came up as we're talking about this question together.
I can go share. Yeah, I don't really remember the first letter, but I had pen pals in Turkey sometime before the age of 12, and I was living in Albany, Oregon. And I remember one of the postcards was I guess it was like a tourist destination, and it was very vibrant blue, and it was these mineral waters that grew on the side of mountain. And I don't know how to pronounce it, but it was something like Pamukkale. And yeah, I just remember being very fascinated by this different geography and natural water that like didn't exist where I lived.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. It reminded me of a pen pal I had, but later in my college time, I continued my like pen pal journey up until I think even right now I'm still writing, um, but my first memory, very first, was receiving a letter from my parents. I forgot it was my mom or my dad. And I guess in my family, there's a lot of conversation that was, or maybe for them, it was difficult to have with me in like to talk to me or like to speak like verbally. Also, I grew up with stammer, I guess. And my dad too grew up with stammer, and so I guess probably it was my dad. So maybe like in grade two or second grade or third grade, I remember my dad wrote me a letter. I forgot what he wrote about, but I think it was something that he normally wouldn't share with me. Mostly it's about how I think it was the new year around, and I'm probably turning 10 or like 10, maybe it's like significant or something. I'm like running into the 11. And so having 2 digit on my age, whatever. And so I think he wrote me a letter and sort of shared a little bit about his childhood, which I rarely hear him talking about in like family conversation or even dinner tables. So yeah, I remember. So letter writing sort of hold me into a space that almost like a third space, like because we do share. Like I grew up in a not like a nuclear family, but we live very close to my grandparents, and we shared like dinners and everything together. So it's like a big family style. So we share that space, and we also have like our own apartment. But at the same time, I felt like mail or writing kind of create like a almost a third space in order to communicate some of the relationship or intimacy that's almost like outside of the or like more traditional or like Chinese or East Asian like Confucius that patriarchal society. Because in the letter, my dad, I remember the feeling of my dad wrote very softly and almost I couldn't tell if the tone almost sounds like my grandma, but my grandma doesn't know how to write. So there's that almost um, almost that depatrialize him. And I remember that kind of like transformed our relationship in a very different way. And still sometime right now we write letters to each other. Like more recently, I was flying out from China to the States, and my dad works in the city that's like 4 hours away from the airport. That day he couldn't, I thought he wouldn't come, but then he actually made it. He was like driving 4 hours to the airport and surprised me and just to say goodbye. And because the time was so short, so he actually had me a note, like kind of like a letter. He wrote me, he was like, hey, here it is. And so it kind of connects like in this way, almost time unfolds itself and almost like a palimpsest that's rewriting on itself. So yeah, that's my experience. I'm wondering who else want to share.
Nobody else wants to share. We can move on to the next question. Yeah, we would love to invite everyone to think about the relationship between art and male art and writing and your own practice. Since we are doing this collective like circuits of correspondence kind of experiment and play together, we're really curious to see like how this form of creative practice like shows up in your own individual practice, and how and in what ways does the act of sending or receiving and exchanging written or visual materials influence your approach to storytelling and intimacy or resistance, and also connecting to our collective like work together, like how, I guess, like what are you curious to explore together. And maybe we could have another song, maybe 3 minutes for some reflection and journaling time, and then we can reconvene to discuss. space. Hope everyone enjoyed the music. It's Heart Chakra by Beautiful Chorus. Highly recommend. Yeah, it was really sweet to hear everyone's memory associated with writing or receiving a first letter, and like hearing a lot of stories in relationshiip to family, friends, pen pals, and relationships that are yet to be formed. So with this question, yeah, just wondering if anybody wants to start sharing about what art, male art, and writing, how all of these things show up in your practice, and what does that mean for you to incorporate it in your approach to storytelling and cultural organizing.
I can start off answering. Yeah, I think like the first function of writing letters was that I moved around a lot in my younger days, and so it connected me to people. And like I guess I was trying to experience like a consistency. And then I think later on in my life, it's like I think it's gotten harder and harder for me to like just speak and like gather my thoughts and feel comfortable with people like in the present moment. And so I think the slowness of letter writing and the slowness of the response time, it's just like much easier or comforting for me. And even like with social anxiety to like meet someone online and then begin like mail art correspondence, or even just like a one-off where I don't hear back. Maybe they'll send me like a DM in response. I think that that method is just much more comfortable for me rather than just meeting someone and talking. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely relate to a lot of the slowness of, and also the pacing. I think it's a part that I think, at least to me, the velocity almost of how the message transform and almost ferment during the time. Almost there's a fermentation happening during the time of mailing, and also that anticipation with I think that's happened a lot to me as well in terms of like mail art or writing in general. And I think kind of related to my first response to the question about writing, I think speaking or verbalizing, I wouldn't say like there are other forms of, I guess, speaking, like even facial expression, but I guess verbalizing was something like a little bit challenging to me when I was a child. So writing almost served as, I often tell people, like writing at that time was my second tongue, like as if it were almost, I was remembering it helps me like the slowness of writing, and also the like mailing things and waiting in that space almost create a lot of space of meditation, and that in betweenness of slowing. I think that also was something reflected in my other practice as well. Kind of like that informed my practice in terms of like that fermentation, for example, influenced how I was very interested in food, like food art or fermenting like rice, for example, as a process of art making, or working on like stop motion animation, like frame by frame by frame, and now knowing almost not knowing how it looked like, but playback of it, like once like finished maybe like a section, and I looked back and see how the transformation goes. Or working on like 16 millimeter film or analog, photography, for example. And I think that also have a lot, almost like a letter writing to the time, because you don't know what's actually in the camera, like on the film. Like you can have some of the time like imprinted on it, but it takes that time sort of in between to kind of get it to review itself, almost like a time like travels back to me, and I create that experience and that intimacy almost in between. So I think we also have something more to share about that.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm thinking a lot about letters that don't get sent, or letters that have to keep beginning again, or letters that maybe we wait for some time before we respond to, or there's some resistance to responding to certain letters as well. And I think a lot of those spaces of like pause and silence and gaps actually say a lot about whether it's like myself or like my relationship with this person, or the kind of time and space that I'm in. And I think like my relationship to writing definitely has been a little bit better these 2 years. I actually started my creative practice as a writer when I was younger. And writing at the time, I think, was a lot of like conversation with myself, a lot of processing the world around me, and thinking a lot. And that was also like kind of coming into like political consciousness, and like thinking more intentionally about what does my writing like do for other people. And so I wrote a lot about like cross-cultural experiences, and my reflections about like relationship with the environment, and like as a teenager. But I think that relationship definitely changed during COVID, and like with so many just like the kind of violence that we continue to witness and experience. Writing became too much for me for a long time, because it feels like, oh, I'm not only experiencing this, but I also need to process it again, like through writing. So I had a very long period of like writer's pause, which I think is a more forgiving and compassionate framing of it than writer's block. But that's when I turned to actually photography, and taking photos is kind of my way of like writing, became my primary way of writing to myself and the people that I love. And so my return to writing, there's like 2 points of re-beginning for me. The first one is I started writing on my photo prints, and kind of thinking about like, oh, what is something that I want to say to the people that I document, because a lot of the people that I take photos of are like Chinese queer feminists and like BIPOC like organizers and other artists in my life. And so I started writing on the edges of my prints, and kind of like a Polaroid, because I love Polaroids as well. So that's something that helped me get back into writing. And then also writing letters to and with Laura has helped a lot in terms of thinking about kinship, thinking about memory, and a lot of memories that we are sharing and like co-creating together, and having that space where I know that something that I write doesn't need to be perfect, and that like I trust that this receiving person would have more compassion to whatever I share than like the kind of self-criticality, or like whatever that I think for my own writing or for my own practice. And so I think these 2 points of re-beginning, like through photography, and then also through my collaboration with Laura, has been really like life-changing for me. And so for that I feel really grateful that I'm finally getting back into writing again. And yeah, through like a lot of it is handwritten, like going back to the body and like analog forms. Oh, I see some comments in the chat about liking the idea of fermentation, currently feeling that pause as well. Thank you for the commiseration. Does anybody else want to share?
Sorry.
Well,
Please, Laila, after you.
Yeah, I have this experience of writing as a moment that comes to break sort of an intensity in my everyday work, because I've been involved. I'm still involved in a project in a collective space, and so it was quite a lot of work and organizing and being in conversation with a lot of people, artists, cultural makers, cultural workers, etc. And when for a person who's also very much sort of introvert, but it was taking so much of my energy that, to me, the moment I would stop and start writing was really that very precious moment that would reconnect me with myself, but also with my own practice. And so I have this way of writing which is very fragmented. I take notes all the time. So I can take notes on notebooks, on my phone. If I'm in front of my computer, I would text somebody to not forget something, or text myself. So there's this fragmented sort of notes everywhere, and all together they become kind of a project that I've been working on since, I don't know, the past 10 years maybe. So this have started really around 2010, and it have started as rather a healing process, because I needed to I was going through a lot of difficulties, like a rupture, a breakup, mental health, etc., mental issues. And so writing was really there as the space where I could really share things that I couldn't talk about with other people. And so I kept this as a ritual, but it became something sort of like a personal practice, and I add layers to it every time. So the last layer was that I got a few years ago a typing machine, and the typing machine became a trigger for fiction. So when I use a typing machine, suddenly I start to write fiction. I cannot write like real stories with the typing machine, but the moment I start with this machine, it becomes something different. So each tool, each way of writing is related to something. It's even rather related to an emotion. And so while I'm doing it, I'm discovering all these aspects of writing, and it's becoming, a very like intimate space to me in my practice. And the writing is not something specifically that I share that I share as a work, but it's rather a process. So I usually keep it for myself. I have a lot of writing, but it's I just feel that the writing is very powerful, because it's really the space where I personally can put everything in it. So yeah.
So it's so interesting. These prompts are facilitating this visitation of my younger selves. So in the sense that, writing sort of emerged as a way to connect with someone, or in the sense that, like, my brother was my first audience. When I was in junior high, I was really into the B-52s, this band from, just like sort of new wave band that had a resurgence in the early 90s. And I was so obsessed with them that I joined their fan club. and you would get fan club newsletters, and then you would have people who would put their addresses and information if you want to write to each other. So that was sort of my first introduction to the pen pal, and from there, different networks of pen pals would emerge. So as my taste became a little more niche for music, growing up in Los Angeles, I remember my mom would drive us to school, and I would listen to KXLU, the Loyola Marymount University college radio station. They would play a range of things that you wouldn't hear on commercial radio, of course. And so that would also inspire me to seek out different publications. So I was, uh, I would go seek out Maximum Rock and Roll, and the newsstands that would have Maximum Rock and Roll would also have zines. And so I would, buy zines, and there would also be sections in Maximum Rock and Roll in the back where you could, a pen pal section. So I would start writing to people. And I remember there was one moment when I had my cadre of pen pals who we all liked a range of like goth music or punk or whatever was in the sort of independent musical ethers. And I remember that we would pass around these collages, these little booklets, and the booklets would contain blank pages. But the booklets, the initial pages would be sort of collaged and written and taped over, just like, hey, I'm so and so. This is my address. These are the bands I'm into. And then so you'd have these little booklets of just like people's different pages. And so that's how you would get to know other people, and then you would pass on, you would make your page and then put it back into the envelope of for another pen pal to like kind of build and keep adding. And and so I just think about like the analog life and the way that we would like connect with people and find ways to sort of like signal and flag. It's like, hey, this is who I am, this is where I am, this is what I'm into. If you're into it, like drop me a line, drop me a note. And then to Lila's last comment about writing fiction, when you have a group of pen pals to, I always had a letter like in my mailbox all throughout high school. And so there were certain urgencies in the way that like, certain pen pal relationships would kind of take on whatever charge and dynamic. And so it was also my first introduction to a sense of the interior, of another person's interior, and sharing my interior with another person, essentially a stranger, and how those intimacies with strangers sort of like, were initiated for me, and but also, that those intimacies with strangers were sort of modes of curiosities of just like, well, what else? What else makes you sort of tick? What else is going on? I remember I had this young goth boy in Indianapolis, this white kid named Scott, and he was really depressed, but he wrote so beautifully and was always talking about just like unrequited love and whatnot. But being really invested in his like feeling better. So yeah, so in the sense, like I think just art, brought me to people, and then people sort of like brought writing to me, and I don't know, I so it's an interesting sort of like um I'm very like hesitant to like for of indulging in whatever nostalgia, but also this feels like very important nostalgia to sort of like to wait to the waters to wade in. So I'm very grateful for these prompts. They're really enabling me to visit sort of these links between art and writing, the self and the other. So cool. Thank you.
Thank you all for sharing. Yeah, particularly I want to just like before we go into I kind of like, I think it transitioned very smoothly to the last question that we're gonna have. But I just want to kind of share my appreciation to Laila and Raquel and Mitsuko's stories with responding to this one, particularly about, I think a lot of the parts particularly touched upon like who we're writing to, or like this letter writing have like very specific like audience, or we know who we are writing to. And I feel that make me take a pause to reflect on a current art world or the space that I'm in, I guess, particularly in the global north space. A lot of the time I feel like the contemporary art world sets up in a world where we are imagining a crowd but almost faceless, and almost I'm losing contact with who I am creating, or this artwork is for whom. And when we think about audience, it almost a capitalism driven machine forces like paint those faceless figures with almost, like I'm becoming more visual or performative right now, but like a crowd, and I don't know who am I creating to, and that's their self-criticism and almost that void, feeling very like lost in the process of making. I think that sort of almost intensified after COVID a lot for me, and also to think about, like, because recently we're curating shows and thinking about screening. We're like, oh, like, what about we only invite, maybe like this work is for just 8 friends of us. Like, why is creating, or for example, a screening among 8 of us is less quote unquote important than creating, like 1,000 people screening. Like what are some, those critical, like it's borrowing from Adrienne Marie Brown's emergent strategy, was the critical relationship of this, or intimacy bonding with one stranger, or passing, like, the letters to us, quote unquote, like a small or niche, or even just with myself, like Huiyin was saying, like writing to themselves, and or dream journaling, writing to themselves, like, or as Laila was sharing also about, like, those notes. Yeah, I was I think that kind of transitions to our like third question about community and activism, and how we see art sort of as a role in it.
Yeah, I think for me, like, there's different kind of scales of impact and like different modes of impact that I'm thinking about. Especially, I think a lot of us are involved in like both like art and organizing spaces, and there's a lot of interconnection among those spaces, but there's also like different kind of modes of evaluation, like different assumptions or like paradigms of actions that that like maybe we're stepping into or stepping away from. And I think one of those, for me, is in organizing spaces, there is that pressure to be like, we need to go big, we need to influence the mass kind of amount of people, which is, there is that mass mobilization aspect of it, but then there is also the intimate, like cultural organizing, the relational aspect of it. And sometimes there's there are some tension, like between people who who are more subscribed to one thing over the other. And so yeah, I'm just thinking about like how our art, like our conversations, and like our all of these kind of relational aspects of art, male art, writing, and cultural organizing that we're exploring together, how they play into this multiple pieces of puzzle or ecosystem of social change. And so really interested in like hearing from all of you about, like, for example, what kind of legacy or lineage does your work, our work, like engage with or draw inspiration from? Is there, it doesn't have to be someone who's like famous, or
My grandma.
yeah, it could be grandmothers, or like kind of like the questions that we were thinking about in our Google Doc conversation about queer feminist ancestors. So yeah, what kind of legacy, lineage does your work engage with or draw inspiration from? What kind of role do you think artists or collective play, collective practice have in shaping narratives and resisting erasure, and like building relationships or grassroots kind of networks of care, and imagining like different futures together through whether it's like text or visual storytelling, or just simply like existing in community with each other together. So we'd love to think together along those lines, and maybe we could hear another song again for the next couple minutes, and then we can reconvene. We're also gonna send the prompt in the chat. To slowly start coming back to our collective Zoom space. Feel free to take a moment of pause if you need to as well. I'll personally drink some water. Tea, actually. Yeah, I hope everyone had the chance to either journal or reflect or simply rest for a little bit. And yeah, wondering if anyone wants to start responding to this prompt. I could start if nobody else wants to start first. I think personally, for me, I feel really inspired by kind of like our previous conversations about interiority, like what it means to write to ourselves and our loved ones. And I think, yeah, I definitely relate to what Laura shared as well about like the kind of all of these different kind of roles that we have and like the different expectations that are sometimes sometimes it's like we take up those roles and like expectations, and sometimes those expectations are forced upon us. And also like maybe, you know, we also internalize a lot of those in order to internalize and act upon those expectations in order to maybe make our work more legible or like more, sometimes more accessible for certain audiences. And I think for me personally, this this past few months, I've been thinking about my work in terms of like a love letter to all of the people that I love and care about and who love and care about me. And I really appreciated one conversation I had with Laura when I was spiraling about my solo exhibition, which just opened a week ago. And it is like a lot of photographs from my kind of daily encounters with basically a BIPOC queer feminist, especially in Durham, Raleigh-Durham area, and some also from like New York and other places. And I was like panicking, kind of like thinking about like, oh, like, you know, it feels, I don't know, like I know that these photos like tell stories on their own, and like I don't feel ashamed about sharing like the kind of love that I have for my community, but at the same time, like it feels like sometimes the kind of work that we do like as like cultural organizers are not kind of deemed like as enough like for like a white wall or like these types of like cultural institutions. And so I was spiraling a lot about that, and then Laura offered something. They were like, oh, how about you think about this exhibition like with the same kind of compassion that you would have like as if I, like Laura, was the person doing it, and then they would do that same for their exhibition as well. And then and that really like helped a lot for me in terms of thinking about all of this as like, even if it's just for one person or even if it's just for the people that are in community with me, like that in and of itself is very meaningful, and like creating an archive for ourselves and like creating these spaces of like connection and play. And so, and in my opening reception, a lot of my friends came over, and then people were like chatting about the photos, like talking about what they remember about the photos, and also laughing about a lot of the handwritings that I had on the photos. Thinking about like they were making comments like, oh, like, yeah, this is such a personality photo for this person, and like, oh, this is actually how I feel 90% of the time when I wake up and I see the world and everything that's so wrong about it. And so there's a lot of those kind of like encounters like with so much humor and so much love. And we had like mutual aid, like tabling as well happening at the reception, like all of these different threads connecting. And really that like I felt like, wow, like this is why like I'm creating, and this is the kind of like slowness and like change that I want to see like with my work. And so I feel like that experience has been really affirming for me, even though like of course like I still want to do a lot of like direct action, like mass mobilization, but at the same time I think change cannot happen without this deep relational building that that art is such like an important part of. And yeah, and I just wanted to share that with you all as well.
We can also, because it's toward the end of our conversation as well, and I do know that's like an hour and more than an hour almost for artists who zooming in before checking in for tech check. It's like almost an hour, so more than an hour. So it's like might be like mentally, you know, like might need to take some break, and just kind of want to also chime in to see if there's any audience, if you have any like questions, you can prompt to you know, like in the in the group chat, or we're also opening up for the floor. Like, feel free to respond to this question that we share, but also feel free to, Hui and I took the space and be the facilitator to respond to each other. But I don't think you all have opportunity to respond to each other yet. So feel free and to just kind of share this remaining 15 minutes as a time for us to, cheers and share our dessert. Like it's passing the third course meal, and then now we're at dessert time.
Yeah, feel free to pick up like a previous point that somebody made, or even initiate a new conversation.
Yeah. Oh, April wrote, it's been a pleasure listening to you. I have to leave soon. Hope to see you all again April 19. Very excited to send and receive our postcard soon. Same. Thank you so much.
Gracias, Abril.
Gracias a ustedes, ha sido maravilloso. Nos encontramos pronto. Un beso.
Does Laila, Mitsuko, Raquel want to share anything? Even Geraldine?
I can share something. I just want to say, yeah, so many things everyone mentioned. I just had so many responses internally, and yeah, similarities and stuff. And I'm excited to write to you all and express those connections, which is also helpful for me because usually I feel a connection to someone and then I start a correspondence. So this was really helpful. I will just say in response to that last question about our mail art or our work and future making, it brought up this project that I had just recently done. There's this group in Los Angeles called Okaidi, and they bring together like LGBTQ, Japanese American and Japanese allies, and they had invited me to design the cover. And so I wrote an imaginary mail art piece to this person, Michio Fukaya, who's a lesbian poet and activist and lived on welfare and is a survivor of childhood abuse. And I felt very drawn to her spirit. And so I created an imaginary address based on where, they talked about that she lived, and wrote a piece to her. And that's on the book cover for this book that just came out through Okaidi called Letters to Home. And so I don't know, somehow I just recently talked about that piece on Zoom. So I guess I was just thinking about it in relationship to the question, but yeah.
Yeah, the work of Margaret Randall has been really inspiring. When I was in college, I did a minor in Central American Studies at Cal State Northridge, California State University in Northridge in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles County. And I often came across these collections of genocide survivors in Central America, like Rigoberta Menchú, and then these other collections of testimonies that Margaret Randall had edited with women uh, guerrillas in Cuba and Nicaragua. And so just so that was the genre of the testimonio. The testimony was really instrumental for me to sort of get a sense of language and witnessing and survival, and that they were also manifestos and what's the other word? What's the other word? It's it'll come to me. But and then, going back into Margaret Randall's history as an editor of of poetry for the work El Corno Emplumado out of Mexico City, the feathered horn. I think that's the my attempt at a translation. And this incredible book of poems, anthologies of poetry, sourced from poets all over Latin America, and also just the sort of the Latin American answer to the beats, or maybe even surpassing the beats, in the sense that you'd have poets from Uruguay, Nicaragua, Chile, all kind of like, hey, show up unannounced on Margaret Randall's door, and her collaborator, whose name escapes me, and just like, hey, can I stay here? Can I do a reading? So that level, of editing and collaboration, stayed with me, and sort of informed my own um, just thinking and practice, and also inspired me to maybe turn up the collaboration knob, in the sense that writing is also very insular and very solitary, but also it's a very necessary salve for when you have collaboration fatigue. But then sometimes the risk of solipsism is always present, so needing to sort of step away from yourself and turn to collaborators. So just keeping those balances. But yeah, so just yeah, shout out to Margaret Randall. Thank you for putting that in the chat space.
Laila or Geraldine or anybody else, do you all have anything you want to share or respond to?
Yeah, maybe I can share a thought about something I'm currently writing. I'm trying to write currently a letter. It's really started recently. I'm writing a project, but it's a project that takes the form of a letter, and it's addressed to my grandmother. And actually, I'm trying to recall the kind of relationship that I did have with my grandmother, because we didn't speak the same language. And so we never spoke the same language, my grandmother and I. She spoke Amazigh, which is the indigenous, one of the indigenous languages in Morocco. And I speak another one, just because I've been educated in the city, and she spent the whole of her life in the village where she was born and grew up, until she moved to the city, where most of the families from this village have immigrated for many reasons. So we sort of have we developed a kind of way of communicating, which is more around body language, gestures, and make me think about the writing. How can you write this kind of relationship that you develop with another person which is a nonverbal exchange, a nonverbal connection and exchange. And so, yeah, so I'm just sharing this because I'm in the process of trying to give a forum to this. Also, I'm like diving into memory and into something that I have never really thought about. It was always there because it's imprinted in my body and in my memory. But now that I'm trying to manifest it as a writing piece or a letter, it really sort of difficult to give it shape. Also, given that we have been raised in a culture that it's very much about orality, so we've been taught a lot of stories, etc. In my family, writing wasn't really something that was very like writing letters or something like this. So it's for me, it's a question always of a translation of languages, but also translation of forms. And so it's everything happens in a sort of an intersection of different types of translations. And so I think I'm very much interested in this space of how do you translate something into, how do you translate a feeling, but also a gesture or an experience into words. And so the writing give this space, but it's not an easy process. It's kind of can be sometimes heavy. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. Wondering if anyone, I think we still have time to have like one comment or if not, yeah,
We can head over to any closing remarks from anyone or Lace.
Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, this has been an amazing conversation. I was, yeah, I hope that everyone feels as inspired and energized. And yeah, I agree with Raquel. It's kind of like, I don't know, I don't know if it was like, you know, on purpose, but taken me also like through memory lane, and I appreciate that. And I like been recalling different moments. Like I completely forgot, for example, that I had pen pals, and I was like, oh yeah, I have pen pals too. Super weird. But yeah, and then reading the chat, Sarah's mentioning that Zoom is a challenging environment for body language. So I appreciate everyone. We appreciate Alexia very much for the interpretation. And yeah, we're very happy that some Spanish speaking folks are here in the audience too. Don't be shy. Next time it will sort of be like a flip situation where the main conversation will happen in Spanish, and then we'll have the simultaneous interpretation in English. So then we'll hear from Geraldine and Abril and also Regina Galindo. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing. Excuse me, for being vulnerable in this room. And yeah, I hope that yeah, you also get inspired for the letter exchange. And yeah, I'm also inspired to write some postcards too. So yeah, any words, Sarah? Would you like to say anything?
Thanks so much. I didn't know we were going to get so into like history of letter writing, and I hope you're all happy. I spared you sharing my 14-year-old self. My mother recently found this letter I wrote to her from music camp, and I thought about sharing it, but I've spared you that. Next time, I'll share it with Selene and Juan and Neil.
Next time.
Please share with us. That would be so sweet to witness.
I'm my mother's not super sentimental, so I'm really surprised she saved this, and I literally do not remember almost anything that I wrote in the letter. So I'm not going to tell you how many years ago it is, but it's a while. It's a while.
Amazing.
Can we
Thank you
at
so
least
much.
get the pull quote, Sarah?
A pull quote. I'll share that with you later, Martian.
What instrument were you
mysterious.
playing at music camp?
I was a flute player.
Nice.
Yep. 14. Yeah.
So cool.
There are musical terms in this letter that I don't even remember what they mean. So
Thank you. I also want to give a shout out to Juan for hosting and making sure that all the tech was great. And yeah, I also want to say I appreciate, that everyone is like on different time zones. We didn't mention that at the beginning. But for example, I'm in Tijuana right now, so I'm transmitting from Mexico really happily. So yeah, if and there's, right now it's 12:30, 12:30. And we know Laila, it's what, like 6:30 p.m. with you?
7:30.
7:30. What time is or there with you, Mitsuko?
3:30 p.m. now.
Very cool.
would love
And
to see
Geraldine
Geraldine. What time is it there?
from Argentina.
4:30.
4:30 p.m.
It
Thank you.
It would be so great to have some of your friends from all these different places join us for the next conversation in April. So hopefully we'll see a few more of your friends online together.
Yeah, please come back and then please tell your friends and share the links and the invitations. We'll also obviously reshare on
For
social
sure.
media. But yeah, please help us promote
Yes.
for the next one, and we'll upload the recording on our website.
Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks
Gracias.
to the
Gracias a
listening.
todos. Adiós. Hasta la próxima.
Gracias.
Chao.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you.